In a landmark decision that will have far-reaching consequences for U.S. trade policy, the Supreme Court has struck down the Trump administration's sweeping tariffs on imports from Brazil and India. This historic ruling marks a pivotal moment in the ongoing debate over the balance of power between the executive and legislative branches when it comes to setting the nation's trade agenda. By ending a period of economic uncertainty and legal contention, the court's decision brings clarity to businesses, investors, and everyday Americans who have been caught in the crossfire of unpredictable trade measures. For months, companies struggled to adapt to rapidly changing tariffs, while consumers faced higher prices on everyday goods. The ruling, delivered on August 17, 2025, decisively shifts the power to impose broad tariffs back to Congress, curbing what many saw as executive overreach in trade policy. Legal experts say this decision reasserts the constitutional principle that Congress holds the authority to regulate commerce with foreign nations, not the president acting alone. The justices found that the administration exceeded its authority by invoking the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, legislation originally intended for genuine national security crises, to justify sweeping economic measures. The court emphasized that using emergency powers for routine trade disputes undermines the intent of the law and sets a dangerous precedent. By closing this legal loophole, the Supreme Court has prevented the executive branch from gaining unchecked control over trade policy, reinforcing the vital separation of powers that underpins American democracy. This decision is seen as a safeguard against future attempts to bypass congressional oversight in matters of trade and taxation. The now invalidated 50% tariffs on $135 billion in goods had fueled inflation, disrupted supply chains, and slowed job growth across multiple sectors. Businesses faced mounting costs, while consumers were left grappling with rising prices on everything from electronics to groceries, leaving both groups in a prolonged state of limbo. With the court's decision, stability returns to the marketplace. Companies can now plan ahead with greater confidence, make long-term investments, and hire new workers. For American families, the ruling offers hope for relief from higher prices and a more predictable economic environment. While the White House warns that the decision could reduce the president's flexibility to respond quickly to global economic threats, business leaders and lawmakers across party lines are hailing the ruling as a victory for the rule of law. Ultimately, the Supreme Court's decision reaffirms that Congress, not the president, holds the constitutional power to control trade and taxation, ensuring that major economic decisions remain in the hands of the people's elected representatives. A tariff is essentially a tax imposed by a government on goods that are brought into a country from abroad. These taxes are applied at the border, and their main purpose is to regulate trade between nations. By making imported goods more expensive, tariffs can shift the balance in favor of products made within the country. This price increase is designed to encourage consumers to buy domestic products instead of foreign alternatives, supporting local industries and jobs. When shoppers see higher prices on imported goods, they may be more likely to choose items produced closer to home. For example, if a 10% tariff is placed on a car that costs £20,000, the price jumps to £22,000. This extra cost is rarely absorbed by the importer. Instead, it's usually passed on to the consumer, making imported cars less attractive compared to domestic options. Tariffs come in several forms, each with its own impact on trade and pricing. The first is ad valorem, which is calculated as a percentage of the goods value, so the more expensive the item, the higher the tariff paid. The second type is specific, which is a fixed fee charged for each unit imported regardless of the item's price. The third is compound, which combines both a percentage of value and a fixed fee per unit, making it a hybrid approach. By raising the cost of imports, tariffs not only generate revenue for governments but also influence the choices consumers make at the store. They can protect emerging industries and sometimes even national security interests. Historically, tariffs were a primary source of government funding before income taxes existed. Today, they're used more as tools of trade policy, negotiation, and sometimes as leverage in international disputes. However, the impact of tariffs doesn't stop at the border. The extra costs ripple through the supply chain, affecting manufacturers, retailers, and ultimately everyday consumers. This often results in higher prices for a wide range of everyday goods, from groceries to electronics, and can contribute to overall inflation in the economy. That's why broad tariffs like those recently overturned tend to spark widespread concern about rising living costs and the affordability of essential products for families everywhere. The Constitution gives Congress, not the President, the power to set and collect taxes, including tariffs. This design was a direct response to monarchy, ensuring tax power rests with elected representatives. The Commerce Clause further cements Congress's authority over international trade. Historically, Congress debated and set tariffs directly, ensuring public scrutiny. Over time, Congress delegated some trade powers to the President, but always with checks and balances. The Supreme Court's ruling reaffirms that only Congress can impose broad tariffs, rejecting the idea that a trade deficit is a national emergency. President Trump declared a national emergency over trade deficits, invoking the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to impose sweeping tariffs on Brazil and India. This was the first time IEPA was used for tariffs, bypassing traditional checks and sparking controversy. The tariffs were a blanket tax on all imports from these countries, affecting $135 billion in trade. Critics argued that trade deficits are common and not true emergencies, questioning the administration's motives. The move was seen as a dangerous expansion of executive power, allowing the president to tax by decree. The tariffs faced immediate legal challenges from a coalition of states, industry groups, and small businesses, all arguing executive overreach. Plaintiffs contended that a trade deficit doesn't qualify as a national emergency under IEPA, warning of a dangerous precedent. Lower courts sided with the challengers, ruling the tariffs illegal, but the administration appealed, keeping the tariffs in place. The case escalated through the courts, with businesses stuck in costly limbo. The administration warned of economic fallout if presidential tariff powers were curbed. Ultimately, the Supreme Court agreed to hear the case, setting the stage for a historic decision on presidential power in trade. The 50% tariffs on Brazilian and Indian goods cost Americans an extra $67 billion annually, with businesses passing the burden to consumers. Inflation spiked, and job growth slowed dramatically as companies faced higher costs and uncertainty. Firms relying on imports cut operations, delayed expansions, and laid off workers. Customs revenue soared by $18 billion a month, but economists agreed the broader economic damage outweighed these gains. The Supreme Court's ruling now opens the door for over $100 billion in tariff refunds to affected companies. This could help businesses recover, rehire workers, and lower prices. The refund process will be complex, but it promises a direct reversal of the tariff's economic harm. The decision could act as a powerful stimulus for the U.S. economy in the months ahead. The Supreme Court's decision was met with relief from business leaders, who welcomed the return of legal certainty and stable supply chains. Financial markets responded positively as tariff-related uncertainty faded. Legal experts praised the ruling as a victory for the separation of powers and the rule of law. Most Democrats and moderate Republicans applauded the decision, hoping it would foster more collaborative trade policy. The White House and allies criticized the verdict, warning it weakens the presidency's ability to protect American workers. For consumers, the ruling promises lower prices and relief from rising living costs. Workers in import-dependent industries hope for job security as businesses regain stability. While political debate continues, the immediate effect is economic relief and a return to predictability for many Americans. The Supreme Court's landmark decision marks a pivotal moment in the evolution of U.S. trade policy, fundamentally shifting the balance of power over tariffs and commerce back to Congress, where the Constitution originally placed it. By ending the use of broad emergency powers for sweeping tariffs, the court has reined in the executive branch's ability to act unilaterally on trade matters. Presidents can no longer impose wide-ranging protectionist measures by executive order alone. Instead, any significant changes to tariff policy must now pass through the legislative process. This means future actions will require open congressional debate, negotiation, and approval, ensuring greater transparency and accountability in how trade decisions are made. While the president still retains some limited, targeted tariff powers under other statutes, these are now subject to much stricter legal and procedural constraints than before. The scope for executive action is now tightly defined, reducing the risk of sudden, unpredictable trade barriers. For America's global partners, this ruling restores a sense of predictability and trust in U.S. trade policy, making it easier for other nations to plan and invest with confidence. The decision signals a return to rules-based commerce, where international agreements and established procedures guide economic relationships rather than sudden executive actions. This shift is expected to ease global trade tensions, encourage new investment, and foster a more stable environment for businesses at home and abroad. The ruling reaffirms the separation of powers at the heart of American democracy, ensuring that no single office or branch of government can unilaterally control the nation's trade and taxation policies. For consumers and companies, this could mean billions of dollars in refunds, lower prices on imported goods, and a more predictable marketplace. The debate over the best path for U.S. trade policy will undoubtedly continue, with lawmakers, experts, and the public weighing in on the nation's economic future. But now, the rules of the game are clear, and the process is open for all to see. America's commercial future will be shaped by democratic process, careful deliberation, and the voices of its people, not by emergency declarations or executive orders.